Welcome to Into the Words, a podcast from the Highlights Foundation Retreat Center. Today in the cabin are our dear friends Merrill Rainey, Colleen Venable, and Nidhi Chanani. Merrill will be conducting the interview. All three of our guests were on faculty of the Graphic Novels Workshop in August 2019. Here's what they have to say.
Good morning. Welcome, guys, to the Graphic Novel Workshop this weekend. I'd like to introduce my two guests here that we've had this weekend. We have Nidhi Chanani, thank you. Yeah. And then Colleen AF Venable. Both very talented graphic novelists. I was very excited that you guys were both here this weekend. I think the participants have gotten quite a bit out of the weekend, and I can at least go with one thing home that I think they can kind of take off with in their own work. So to start us off with, can you guys both kind of introduce yourself and let us know like what's kind of in the works or what your most recent book was that came out?
Let's go first. We have a coin. We can flip this spoon, but that may just be awkward for the sound. I just had my first teen YA book come out in March called Kiss Number 8 with Ellen Crenshaw, who is the most amazing person ever. This is one of my favorite things about collaboration. Like, I won't be like, oh my God, my book is so good. I'll be like, oh my God, Ellen is the greatest. It makes it so much easier for me to really appreciate it when I see all her art. So that just came out. It's a queer coming of age set in 2004 in a very conservative Catholic community. People keep telling me they cried during it, and I feel really bad because in my mind I was like, it's funny. I was like, oh wait, there's those parts. Oh yeah, sorry. And in the next year, I have a couple other things in the works. I have if you're into kind of robot building, I did a graphic novel for First Seconds Maker Comics with Katherine Hudson is the illustrator, and it's all about how to basically take apart things in your house and make robots out of them. And the end actually teaches you actual coding with Arduino. But the premise is it's almost a video game, and you are being led through the game by a sentient toaster who is trying to take over the world secretly, though the reader realizes it pretty early. And you have all the obstacles in this video game are your siblings, your parents, and the big boss at the end is the cat that's asleep against the door. And it takes you 4 robots to finally get the cat to move. So
Very cool. Very cool.
That's awesome. I was just reading one of the science comics from First Second last night before bed.
Which one were you reading?
I was reading The Brain.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Tori, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
I love her.
And I think I have quite a few of those kind of collection comics, the science comics. And I don't have any of the Maker ones. But it's wonderful to see this whole story. It's not just we're going to go launch straight into talking about the brain. There's a story. They keep coming back to the story. So it keeps you engaged with all this like dense information. Yeah. So
it's a great way to educate, especially from a young person's standpoint, because they just, you look, even like now as an adult, you look at instructions how to build something. You're like, what? I can't really follow this.
Your brain shuts down.
But when you put it in comic format, like, we had this conversation the other day in terms of, I feel like I'm a very visual learner. So if I can see a picture and very short text that just keep me flowing, like that goes a long way.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are visual learners and probably might not be aware of that because they've never been presented material in that form.
Right.
So I'm Nidhi, and my debut graphic novel, Pashmina, came out in 2017, and it's about an Indian American girl who finds a magical Pashmina shawl, and when she puts it on, transports her to a fantasy version of India. And through that journey, she learns more about who she is and where she came from. And I, after that, published with a smaller publisher a bilingual board book called Shubhratri Dost, which means good night, friend. And it's a good night, sleepy board book. And then just this year, I Will Be Fierce came out, which was written by B. Birdsong, which is a picture book. And I'm currently working on my next graphic novel called Jukebox, and it's about 2 Muslim American cousins who find a jukebox and that takes them back in time. And so when they put on records, they go to different decades. in American history, we wanted to, when you think of these stories, you're like, I can do the world. boom.
Right.
And you're like, wait a second.
I have how many pages?
I know exactly. Like, how many volumes do I want this to be?
How much do I want to draw?
Yeah. Do I want my hand to fall?
Yeah. Do I want to draw the Colosseum?
Exactly. Right. Yes. Maybe. But so that I'm in progress. I came here, stopped working. We'll go back like as soon as I go back tomorrow. Continue inking, and that'll be out in 2021.
Okay.
I also just wrapped the Wally picture book with Scholastic, which will be out next year. So that's a lot of stuff.
So I know in preparation of this workshop, I always do research on who's coming because I don't know you guys like physically in person, but I can always tell a lot by the way you guys write or illustrate within a book. You know, you can really get an insight of somebody. So I've really enjoyed meeting the two of you on a personal level, not just from a book level. So that's trying to butter you guys up.
And now the hard
You can ask really intense questions.
What's your feeling about X controversial thing?
So Colleen kind of heard this question a little bit yesterday.
Yes.
But for all those listening, as a graphic novelist, I feel that you guys both grasp writing and illustrating, and you understand the genre well. So from an advice standpoint, if you were just starting out as a writer, what would be your advice to offer them in terms of just getting them something to get going with? And then vice versa, from an illustrator standpoint, if they're thinking about jumping in this genre, what would be something, it could be the smallest bit of advice or the biggest bit of advice, but just something to kind of get them interested and kind of jumping off and moving along.
I mean, I would say with comics, there's always the advice like you should read. Just read so much. I like to also tell people if you want to make comics, you should read plays. You should learn how dialogue works and how pacing works and like how a really good script is read, especially if you're writing it and someone else is going to translate it. You need to leave a lot of room for the illustrator, and you need to also make it really like wonderful and impactful just from reading the words. For people just starting out, I like to say, don't be like, I am doing this 400-page graphic novel, the first thing ever, because I have a feeling you might get to page 40 and then be like, what am I doing with my life? Do a short comic first. Like, find a short story, do an 8-page mini comic that you could fold up. There's a lot of really small press shows. That's how so many famous cartoonists got their start. That's how Gene Yang got found. That's how Jeff Smith got found. That's how Raina Telgemeier got found. Photocopying these short little 8-page comics. She actually serialized Smile in those, and a lot of my friends have the chapters of Smile in black and white photocopied for $1. Like, ridiculous. Go to those shows, and there's always going to be an art director there. There's always going to be publishers there. And the small shows I'm talking about are not like, Comic Cons.
Right.
There's small shows, like there's Staple in Austin, which is a small show, and there's things like Mocha in New York is a very small art show, and SPX in Maryland is actually a very big one. So kind of look and see about those shows. And I always say, like, figure out who your dream publisher is.
Sure.
And who your dream editor is. And just do your research. And then when you do come to the point that you have a story, you're going to be able to talk to them in a much more knowledgeable way.
Where might you go in your own backyard to find this information?
Go to a bookstore.
Yeah.
Start paying attention to the logo on the spine. Is there a certain publisher that is just like, pulling your heartstrings all the time? Go online. It's really easy to find out nowadays who worked on books. And I always say, like, don't just think about the publisher. Don't just like send your note to like the head of the house. There are like 20 other people that worked on your book. If you could figure out who any of them are, like, start to see what else they do too. And also start to follow them on Twitter and on social media and kind of get to know. I don't know. I'm a big believer in like giving credit to people that don't usually get credit, like especially like as a designer and being a junior designer for many years where nobody ever knew I was like, I have done this thing. I will quietly creep into the shadows. But yeah, finding things online. You could look for agents the same way.
Sure.
Find the book you want, search for the announcement about when it was bought, and you'll find out who the agent was. I guess that's my main advice is to be a stalker.
Honestly, you covered so much. I'm just sitting here thinking, okay, don't start with your magnum opus, read a lot of books, figure out who your favorite publisher is based on the books that you like.
Yeah,
I mean, I did all of those things. So I think if I could take it a different route, which is I like telling this, sometimes you give the advice that's like tried and true advice, and it is there's salient points that I think people should listen to. At the same time, that doesn't apply to me.
Right.
So I did illustration for roughly like 8 years before I was really interested in comics and attempted to make a comic.
Yes.
And the first thing I attempted to do was Pashmina. So I did not heed that advice. But at the same time, when for a second and Mark Siegel took me on,
Yes.
he knew he would invest a lot of time into helping me grow because I didn't have that experience. And you're not gonna, I think that I was in a very fortunate, unique position. And he saw something in me. I still don't know how editors can see that.
They just know.
Yeah, I feel like they do. I think it's, obviously it's experience.
Right.
But I still am fascinated by that whole ability anyways, but he saw that in the pitch that I sent and the work that I had done, but you're not necessarily always going to be so fortunate. So starting small and gaining that experience independently. Also, sometimes it was almost embarrassing, in that process. To be totally honest, I would be on these calls with Mark
Sure.
and he would ask me questions that I feel like if I had taken that time to teach myself some basic things about comics, I wouldn't have to be told not to stack panels on the left,
Right.
So there's some things that I think that as you start small and gain experience just doing some small comics, you can work through before you're ready to make that pitch to a publisher.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. So taking a kind of a step a little bit further, how did you guys both kind of get started into the industry? So it doesn't have to be the full canon, but just a little snippet in terms of maybe where your first initial break that happened, that where you knew, okay, this is what's going to be it, and kind of help me start moving forward.
I mean, I will second the Mark Siegel love, because Mark Siegel is really the reason I really got into comics.
Okay.
I was working as a marketing person at Roaring Brook Press, which is the parent company to First Second.
Yes.
And at the time I was doing a webcomic, but pretty quietly. It was a really bizarre photo comic that is very hard to find online. Good luck if you find it, let me know. It's super, super goofy. I had 800 readers, which at the time I was like, me, only 800, because my friends were doing questionable content that is the name of a comic, not what they were doing. And they had 150,000 readers a day, or my friend Randall, XKCD, had 1 million readers a day, and I was 800, whatever. But then Mark knew I did that mini comic, and he kept, I would have to be in cover meetings, and I would give suggestions for covers.
Sure.
And a lot of the suggestions from sales and marketing were make it more teen. And I'd be like, what? Make it more teen? What does that mean?
What does that mean? Right.
And I would say things that I thought were helpful, and Mark would just sit in the corner and kind of nod creepily. And I was like, who is that guy? What is he doing? And he actually was trying to hire a new designer, and spent 4 months interviewing, and I forget exactly what I made. It was a shelf awareness ad that I made for marketing.
Okay.
And barely knew Photoshop, had never opened InDesign, had never opened Illustrator. And Mark came over and he's like, hey, so you know Photoshop? And I was like, yeah, I could put your head on someone else's body. What do you got? And he's like, will you work for me? And I was like, wait, what? And actually wound up going to night school. I got the job as a designer at First Second, had an intense education in comics.
Yeah.
I had been a big webcomic reader, but this was a whole different world.
Different genre, yeah.
And for 6 months was how do you do InDesign? Which is the fact that he hired me when I had absolutely no experience, but he was it's all about having a good eye.
Right.
And it's all about you're stubborn enough that you will get there.
Right.
And you're good at talking with artists because you've been working with so many of them in marketing for a while. So yeah, those first 6 months were ridiculous, but wonderful. And I just got this fantastic thing, and I got to work with all these just incredible creators.
Okay.
Like, you know, Sarah Varon
Sure,
and Ben Hackey,
sure.
and I already mentioned Gene, who's like the greatest. So that's, I mean, it really was Mark Siegel that got me getting my foot in the door. And then when I did have a script ready, it was a lot easier to be able to, you know, show it to my boss than to submit it to other publishers. And I did submit it to other publishers, and I got interesting responses. This was 2008. So the response I got from multiple publishers with, "I'm sorry, we already have a gay book." Which, if any of them said that now, they would be like set on fire on the internet. But at the time, they were worried that there was only room for one on every list, and if they did another book, another gay book as they called it, it would somehow cannibalize their first book. Right. So it was a really wonderful thing. So the advice I always give to people, I was like, one, just be nice. Like, a lot of opportunities will happen when you're just nice, and like, don't be afraid to just have a big mouth, I guess. Yeah. And just tell what you like. So, yeah.
Nidhi?
I think I think that there's something similar I have to say about getting your first break. For me, it was just about asking.
Yeah.
So this was not a formal internship at all, but I emailed some artists that I liked when I was going to art school. So I was 27 when I figured out that I wanted to do art. So I had my literature degree from UC Santa Cruz, and I had been working in nonprofits for years, and I was an executive director. And so I have this whole kind of knowledge base from doing that stuff. Sure. But I kept coming back to art, and I didn't know anybody. That's the other thing is, I feel like, you know, you're based in New York and you're in kind of the belly of the beast and you might have some connections. For me, also coming from my community, nobody I knew growing up was doing anything in the visual arts, like at all. And so it wasn't supported. I wasn't one of those kids who was getting feedback all through my life, like, you should go to art school and you're a great artist. I was a terrible artist. But I kept wanting to do it. It was that desire to do it that pushed me to want to go to art school. So I went to art school and I dropped out after a year. But that was mostly because I went into a second BA program. And I was around all these 18-year-olds who could draw circles around what I could do. But I got a base of knowledge around color and light. And so I felt like that gave me some tools to go independently and work on my own. But I also wanted to be around other artists. So I emailed these artists that I kind of knew, and I was like, hey, do you guys need some help in your studio? And they were like, not really, but if you want to come and hang out in our studio in San Francisco, you're welcome. There's an extra desk here. Right. One of those people is still, like, she's actually one of my best friends. Her name's Lila Warren. She is an animator, and she was a freelancer. She now has a full-time job, but some of those relationships and those friendships, you know, still remain. Sure. And one of the people there his name's Andy Ristino, and he works, I don't know if he works for Cartoon Network now, but he worked on Adventure Time. At the time, he was one of the indie cartoonists that kind of Cartoon Network was just looking around to change their visual style, and so they ended up hiring a lot of indie cartoonists. But he was, you know, just slogging away in obscurity, as Lila loves to say. And so Andy knew Jin Yang. And so I was interning, I use air quotes for that. So I was basically just around other artists in San Francisco, working on my own stuff and asking them questions and, you know, being not a nuisance, but just saying, oh, what are you working on today? And, you know, just being in that environment and seeing that there are freelance artists who are making it and doing all these different kinds of projects was inspirational in it of itself. But I worked on a graphic memoir, which will never see the light of day. But I worked on a graphic memoir while I was there, and I got some feedback and asked questions, and then I finished it, and I was like, what do I do with this now? And so Andy said, you know, I know Gene. Let me send him an email and see if he'll introduce you to his agent. Very cool. So he shot like a very 2-sentence email to Gene. Gene said, here's my agent's information and tell her I sent you. Jean didn't even see my work. There was no attachment.
Wow.
There was just like maybe a description of what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I don't think that this would be the case now. But I was able through that to contact my now agent. And I remember it was literally, and again, I don't think this would be the case now. Within 24 hours, she responded and said, let's talk. And then the next week I had a contract. And when I got the contract, I called my best friend at the time and just was sobbing. And she was like, I thought somebody had died. I was like, no, I just got an agent.
Aww.
Yeah,
That's
but
awesome.
it's Judy Hansen who represents all these people that I had looked up to, including Jean, Raina, Kazu, Ben. The list goes on and on. The Eisner estate, you know. So she knows her stuff.
Sure. That's awesome.
So that was kind of that big break moment.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I know we're looking at the clock. We're kind of getting close on time here.
Sorry.
But I just wanted to ask one more question in general. You guys have kind of been in the thick of this genre that's really catching steam. It felt like it started slow, but I know in my own observations in the last 2 years, like it's really kaboomed out there. So what do you see in terms of types of graphic novels do you think will kind of start to, in the next, say, 4 years, start to kind of come out? Like, is there a theme or kind of specific genre that you feel is kind of starting to kind of bubble and come out? Or do you feel that it's just going to be such a hot pot of everything,
I think it's going to be, I like to think that every type of story is going to be able to be told in graphic novel format. But I will say in the last 2 years, YA comics became a thing.
Okay.
Like, there weren't, like, it was just like middle grade, and then you skipped right to like adult stuff.
Adult stuff, sure.
And when I say adult stuff, I mean like, Saga and I'm thinking of all Brian K. Vaughan books. I was like, Why the Last Man and Paper Girls, and there's no other writer in the world. No, that's not true. But but I think there's a really like big drive for teens to feel like they're hearing their own stories. I was also talking yesterday about how much I want there to be horror comics. Because I was like, in the 80s, horror was so good. I want there to be like a graphic novel adaptation of like Wait Till Helen Comes, which if you've ever read that Mary Downing Hahn, it's a little sister, which I also think I liked it because it was like a little sister basically taunting her older sister. So her older sister's mean to her, and she's like, well, wait till Helen comes. Like, you're not gonna be mean to me anymore. Finally realizes that Helen is actual real ghost that is gonna murder her. And the little sister didn't realize that, but she like unleashed this ghost on her sister, and it's all about the sisters, but it's all about them dealing with this other little girl ghost who's like, I want a friend, so I shall murder. Really, if you read that as a kid, you will never forget it. But talking about a lot of like horror stories, I was like, man, there aren't any really good. Like, there's like Lock and Key, but again, it was published for adults. Joe Hill.
Right.
It would have been a perfect teen book if it came out now. So I'm just looking forward to all the different types of stories. Like, I want to see horror. I want to see really, really, really strong sci-fi epic fantasy that goes on for years,
Right.
I want the Star Wars for teens, So I'm just excited as a reader. I just feel like I read a lot of books, a lot of different types of books. The graphic novels, just there's something about what they can do and just the visuals. And I'm always so excited when it's a group of people doing things. Like Lumberjanes makes me so happy to be like, oh my God, all these awesome women are doing these crazy good stories for teen girls right now that I wish existed when I was a teen. So yeah, I think it's a really exciting time.
That's great.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be a little bit of everything. And I do think what's going to happen, I foresee a lot of adaptations happening. And I know a lot of adaptations are going around right now in terms of like they're trying to find artists. And so I think that will happen with a lot of the bestsellers.
Okay.
I also think that on the YA side, that's going to happen because it needs to happen. But I also see that there's some early reader comics that have started to come out. And it will continue to grow in that market.
Right.
And I think it's appropriate it makes sense, but it's again one of those things that hasn't been explored yet. So you're going to see both of those, I think, boom. And then as, it's like everything, right? And then you're going to have those, everything will get produced, and then you'll have those kind of superstars, and those superstars will start dictating how other things are planned out and invested in.
Kind of stand up and standard of where things should be.
Right. So you have, something like American Born Chinese, or you have something like Fun Home that set kind of a tone for memoir, or, exploring, diverse voices. And so I think that once you have some of those things that maybe in the large acquisition period, you'll have things that stand out, and then through those standouts, I think they'll set that trail for how we go about it. And I do hope that within that, there's still space to explore different genres that haven't been explored, and stories that are being seen, but also there's huge gaps. Right. So I think I hope that we're just still noticing the gaps in content, and the publishers are acquiring based off of what's not there, not just what's sold really well before. Let's just do more of the same of that,
Right. And I think for me, that's what it makes this genre so exciting, is the stories that can be told in such an exciting way, between the novel part, so the writing aspect, but then also the visual part, so to me, I'm fairly excited as well. So I shouldn't say fairly. I'm pretty excited.
Let's get you more excited.
I think the hard part is trying to keep up. We've had this library in the back of the room that everybody that came to the workshop brought a graphic novel, and I love seeing things like that happen, because there's so much that I know that's on my bookshelf.
Right.
But mostly you see what's on your bookshelf is, you'll see it in like a Barnes and Noble. But when you get a group of people together that love this genre, it's amazing how many books you have never heard of, and it gets you excited to reading new materials. So I will end this here. So I want to thank both you guys for being here the last couple of days, and for chatting with us here. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
No, this is great.